Do you ever feel like the bond with your own children is slipping away? Like they're starting to ignore you? Or worse, you sense a loss of respect? You've poured your heart into raising them with love and care, and now you're left asking yourself, where did I go wrong? It's a deep and painful feeling, isn't it? But here's the truth. Reacting with frustration or retreating into sadness won't bring the change you're hoping for. Instead, there's a better way forward. A path built on wisdom, thoughtfulness, and actions that restore dignity, rebuild respect, and create harmony. In today's video, I'm sharing 8 powerful steps you can take right now to heal and strengthen your relationship with your children. These are approaches that have worked for countless parents and can work for you too. Whether the disconnection feels big or small, these strategies are designed to help you reconnect without causing conflict. It's about creating understanding and rebuilding trust, not just for today, but for the long term. So if you're ready to take back control of your relationships with grace and confidence, let's dive in. Before we get started, if you found this video valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue to create meaningful and inspiring content. And here's a quick way to let us know how much this topic means to you. Leave a comment with a 1 if this video meant something to you. Leave a 0 if it didn't. Your support makes all the difference. Let's create more peace and connection together. Now let's get started. Insight 1. Don't react in anger. Pause and reflect. When the people you love the most, your own children, seem to pull away, the pain can feel overwhelming. It's natural to feel hurt, even angry, and to want to lash out. But acting out of anger rarely leads to the outcome you're looking for. Instead, there's power in taking a step back and reflecting. Let me share the story of Mr. Harris, a retired firefighter in his 60s, who learned this lesson the hard way. Mr. Harris had always been a pillar of strength, both for his family and his community. But in recent years, his relationship with his daughter, Emily, had grown distant. Once inseparable, she now barely returned his calls. One Sunday evening, after yet another ignored voicemail, he found himself gripping the phone tightly, tempted to call her again and demand, "Do you even care about me anymore?" Frustration burned in his chest, but something stopped him. Instead of giving in to his anger, Mr. Harris put on his coat and decided to take a walk around the quiet streets of his neighborhood. The evening air was crisp, and as he strolled past familiar homes and trees, memories began flooding in. Birthday parties he'd thrown for Emily, school plays he never missed, the camping trips where they'd stayed up late laughing under the stars. His pace slowed as he reflected on these moments. He realized something profound. His love and sacrifices as a father weren't diminished by Emily's distance. His value didn't depend on whether she called him today or tomorrow. He was a man who had lived a meaningful life, building bonds with his community, saving lives, and raising a family with love. That quiet moment of reflection gave him clarity and peace. Later that week, Emily called unexpectedly. "Hey, Dad, I got your messages. I'm sorry I've been so caught up with work and the kids." Her voice softened. "I miss you. Can I stop by this weekend?" Had Mr. Harris acted on his anger, that moment of reconnection might never have happened. The lesson is clear. Reacting in anger pushes people further away. Instead, pausing to reflect not only protects your dignity, but also allows you to approach the situation with clarity and strength. Insight 2. Set healthy boundaries. Respect is a two-way street, and part of earning it is respecting yourself. Without clear boundaries, you risk sending the message that it's okay for others to take advantage of your time and energy. Here's a story about Mrs. Campbell, a retired librarian in her late 60s, who rediscovered her own strength by setting healthy boundaries. Mrs. Campbell's son, Michael, had always been the kind of person to lean on her, sometimes too much. Over the years, his requests became more frequent and demanding. He'd drop his kids off at her house without notice, call her late at night to vent about work, or ask for money to cover yet another expense. At first, she complied, thinking it was her duty as a mother. But the constant demands were draining her physically and emotionally. One Saturday morning, as she stood in her cozy kitchen making tea, Michael showed up unannounced, expecting her to babysit for the entire day. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar pull to say yes, but then she took a deep breath. She turned to Michael and said, I love you and the kids, but I can't help today. I've already made plans. Michael stared at her stunned. Plans? For what? He asked, clearly annoyed. For me, she said firmly but kindly. I've joined a local gardening club, and we're meeting this afternoon. I've realized I need to take time for myself, too. Michael didn't say much as he left, but over time Mrs. Campbell noticed something remarkable. By prioritizing herself, she began to feel more energized and confident. She started taking yoga classes, hosting game nights with friends, and even planning a trip to visit her sister in another state. Michael, meanwhile, began respecting her time more. His requests became less frequent, and he started showing more gratitude when she did help. The lesson is clear. When you set boundaries, you teach others how to treat you. Respecting yourself doesn't push people away. It helps them see your value. Courage 3. Communicate your feelings wisely. When emotions run high, it's easy to say things you might regret later. But wise communication can transform a strained relationship. Take the story of Mr. Lawrence, a retired small business owner, and his son Ben. For months, Ben had barely spoken to his father. Mr. Lawrence spent many evenings sitting on his front porch, staring at the driveway, hoping to see Ben's car pull in. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He considered calling Ben to demand, "Why don't you ever visit me? Don't you care anymore?" But instead, he chose a different approach. The next morning, he sat down with a cup of coffee and began writing a letter. He poured his heart onto the page, not with blame, but with love. Ben, he wrote, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I miss our talks. I miss hearing about your life. I just want you to know how proud I am of the person you've become, and I'm always here if you ever need anything. A few days later, Mr. Lawrence was tidying up his garden when his phone rang. It was Ben. Dad, I got your letter, Ben said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm sorry I haven't been in touch. Things have been crazy with work, but I didn't realize how much you miss me. That letter marked a turning point. Ben started calling every week and even brought his kids over for Sunday dinners. The key takeaway? When you speak from the heart without blame, you create space for connection. Instead of saying, you never call me, try, I miss hearing your voice. Words, when chosen wisely, have the power to heal even the deepest rifts. By pausing to reflect, setting boundaries, and communicating with care, you can take meaningful steps to rebuild and strengthen your relationships. Insight 4. Rebuild your own life. Find new purpose. When you feel neglected by your children, it's easy to fall into a cycle of sadness, waiting for a call that never comes or a visit that feels overdue. But instead of focusing on what you've lost, the most transformative thing you can do is turn that energy toward rebuilding your own life. Let me share the story of Miss Linda, a retired music teacher in her late 60s, who found a new sense of purpose and, in doing so, reconnected with her family. Linda had always been a vibrant, loving mother, known for her warm smile and passion for music. After her husband passed away, though, life began to feel emptier. Her son, Jake, and daughter, Emma, both lived out of state and visited only occasionally. Over time, even their phone calls dwindled to a few rushed minutes on holidays. Linda found herself sitting alone in her quiet house most evenings, staring at the grand piano she had once played every day. She felt forgotten, and the silence was unbearable. One afternoon, as she was dusting her piano, she came across an old folder of sheet music. She sat down on the piano bench, tentatively pressing the keys. The familiar sound awakened something inside her. That day, Linda made a decision. She wasn't going to wait by the phone anymore. At first, she played for herself, rediscovering old favorites and even composing a few new melodies. But soon she wanted to share her passion again. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching children how to play the piano. Her lessons became the highlight of her week, and she quickly gained a reputation as a beloved mentor. Linda also joined a local choir, where she met a group of lively retirees who became her close friends. Months later, during one of their weekly rehearsals, Linda's phone buzzed with a call from Jake. She stepped outside to answer it, the faint sound of the choir harmonizing in the background. "Mom, I've been thinking about you," Jake said. "You sound happy." What's been going on? Linda laughed softly and told him about the community center and the choir. Wow, that's amazing, Jake said, sounding genuinely impressed. I'd love to hear you play again. Maybe I can bring the kids next month? That phone call was the first of many. Over time, Jake and Emma both began calling and visiting more frequently, not out of obligation, but because they admired their mother's newfound joy and independence. The key lesson from Linda's story is this: when you live a life full of purpose and joy, people are naturally drawn to you. Her transformation reminded her children of the vibrant, inspiring person she'd always been, and it deepened their connection. So instead of waiting for your children to give your life meaning, take control of your own happiness. Whether it's pursuing a hobby, joining a club, or volunteering in your community, finding a new purpose can bring peace, fulfillment, and even strengthen the bonds with those you love. Insight 5. Lead by example. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn through your actions. If you want your children to treat you with kindness and admiration, the best thing you can do is model those behaviors yourself. Let me introduce you to Mr. Richard, a retired postman in his 70s, who learned how powerful leading by example can be. Richard had always been a dedicated father to his 3 children. He worked long hours delivering mail in rain, snow, and heat to ensure his family was provided for. But as his kids grew older, they seemed to drift further away. When they visited, they were often glued to their phones, barely looking up from their screens. One Thanksgiving, his eldest son, Nathan, left after only an hour, muttering something about needing to check emails. It broke Richard's heart, but he chose not to lash out. Instead, Richard decided to focus on how he could lead by example. When his children did visit, he greeted them warmly, saying, "It's so good to see you," with genuine enthusiasm. He didn't complain about their long absences or guilt them about their short visits. Instead, he asked about their work, hobbies, and families, always listening attentively. One summer evening, as the family gathered for a barbecue, Richard demonstrated his quiet leadership. His granddaughter accidentally spilled soda on the patio furniture, and before anyone could react, Richard calmly grabbed a towel, cleaned it up, and reassured her, "Accidents happen. Don't worry about it." His patience and kindness left an impression on everyone, especially Nathan, who later pulled him aside. "Dad, I've been meaning to tell you," Nathan said, looking sheepish. "You're one of the most patient, understanding people I know. I don't know how you do it, but I really admire you for it." From that day on, Nathan began visiting more often, even bringing his siblings along. They realized that Richard's unwavering kindness was something they wanted to emulate. The key takeaway here is this: respect starts with you. When you treat others with kindness and patience, even in moments of hurt or disappointment, you set the tone for how they should treat you. Over time, that respect will come back to you in ways you never imagined. Insight 6. Forgive, but don't forget your worth. Forgiveness can be one of the hardest things to offer, especially when the hurt comes from those closest to you. But forgiveness isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment while still honoring your own value. Let me share the story of Ms. Clara, a retired chef and mother of 2, who learned to forgive without losing her sense of self-worth. Clara had always been close to her daughter Lily, but as Lily built her own life, their relationship grew strained. Clara's calls often went unanswered, and visits became rare. One year, Lily forgot Clara's birthday entirely. Clara spent that evening alone, staring at the empty chair where Lily used to sit during their long chats. For weeks, Clara carried the hurt with her, replaying the memories of their once close bond. But one morning, as she brewed her coffee, she realized something. Holding on to resentment wasn't helping her. She decided to forgive Lily, not for Lily's sake, but for her own peace of mind. Clara wrote Lily a heartfelt letter. "I want you to know I forgive you for the distance between us, and I'll always love you. But I'm also focusing on what brings me happiness." From that day forward, Clara devoted herself to her passion for cooking. She started hosting small dinners for her neighbors and sharing recipes online. Her home was filled once again with the laughter and joy that had been missing. Months later, Lily visited unexpectedly. As she watched her mother whisk together ingredients for a new dish, she said, "Mom, you seem different, happier." Clara smiled. "I've been doing what I love again. You should try it sometime." That visit marked the beginning of a renewed connection. Lily wasn't drawn back by guilt, but by admiration for her mother's strength and resilience. The lesson here is this: forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but it doesn't mean diminishing your worth. By finding joy and fulfillment within yourself, you show the world and your children that your value isn't defined by anyone else's behavior. Insight 6. Stay financially independent. As we age, staying financially independent can be one of the most empowering choices we make, not just for ourselves, but also for the relationships we have with our children. Independence sends a message of strength and self-respect, making it easier for your children to see you as someone they admire rather than someone they need to care for out of obligation. Let me share the story of Mr. and Mrs. Walker, a retired couple in their early 70s, who redefined what it means to live independently. The Walkers had lived in a large 5-bedroom house for decades. It was the home where they raised their 3 kids, hosted countless family gatherings, and built a lifetime of memories. But after retiring, they realized that maintaining such a large home was draining their savings faster than they'd planned. The heating bills during the Michigan winters were sky high, and the maintenance was becoming overwhelming. One evening, while sitting at their kitchen table over a pot of chamomile tea, Mrs. Walker said, "Paul, do we really need all this space? The kids have their own homes now, and we're spending more time cleaning empty rooms than enjoying ourselves." Paul nodded thoughtfully, stirring his tea. "You're right, Linda. Let's find a place that suits us now, not the life we had 20 years ago." A few months later, they sold their home and moved into a cozy 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. The house was smaller but perfect for their needs, with a lovely garden out back where Mrs. Walker planted tomatoes and basil. They set a strict budget, cutting out unnecessary expenses and making the most of their retirement savings. At first, their children were skeptical. "Are you sure you don't need any help with money?" their eldest, Sarah, asked during a visit. "No, sweetheart," Linda replied with a smile. "We've got everything under control. Downsizing was the best decision we've made in years." Over time, their children began to notice how self-reliant their parents were. They never asked for financial help or complained about money. In fact, the Walkers were thriving. They took road trips in their modest RV, joined a local gardening club, and even hosted dinner parties where Paul impressed everyone with his homemade bread. One day, Sarah called her mom to ask for budgeting advice. "Mom, how do you and Dad make it all look so easy?" she asked. Linda chuckled. "It's simple. We live within our means and focus on what makes us happy, not what costs the most." The Walkers' financial independence earned them not just respect from their children, but admiration. They set an example of self-sufficiency and dignity that their family would carry forward for generations. The takeaway? Financial independence isn't just about money, it's about self-respect and freedom. By taking control of your finances, you show your children that you value your dignity and aren't a burden on anyone. While it's okay to ask for help when needed, staying independent as much as possible strengthens relationships and fosters mutual respect. Insight 8. Build a new circle of companionship. Loneliness can creep in as we grow older, especially when our children become busier with their own lives. But relying solely on your children for emotional support can create strain and disappointment. That's why it's so important to build a rich, fulfilling social life outside of family. Let me tell you about Mr. George, an 81-year-old retired mechanic who found joy and connection by creating a new circle of friends. George had always been a family man. He adored his 2 daughters and spent years helping them raise their children after his wife passed away. But as his daughters' careers took off and his grandchildren grew older, George found himself spending more and more time alone in his small apartment. He filled his days tinkering with old car engines and watching reruns of classic westerns. But the silence at night was deafening. One Friday afternoon, after another week without a single phone call from his daughters, George decided he needed a change. While flipping through the local paper, he noticed an ad for a senior activity club at the community center. Why not give it a try, he thought. The following Monday, George nervously walked into the center, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, he was greeted by a lively group of seniors, playing cards, chatting over coffee, and planning their next day trip. A woman named Marlene approached him with a warm smile. "Hi there. First time here?" she asked. Yeah, George replied, scratching the back of his neck. I wasn't sure if this was my kind of thing. Well, you're here now, Marlene said, handing him a cup of coffee, and we could always use another player for poker. Before long, George was a regular at the center. He joined the poker group, signed up for a walking club, and even started attending their movie nights. He struck up a close friendship with Marlene, and together they organized a weekly classic car meetup in the center's parking lot. One evening, as George sat around the poker table with his new friends, his phone buzzed. It was his daughter, Emily. Hey, Dad, I just realized it's been a while since we talked, she said. How are you doing? George smiled. I'm great, honey. Just won a poker game and about to plan a road trip with some friends. Emily paused, clearly surprised. Wow, Dad, that's amazing. I didn't realize you were so busy these days. From then on, George's relationship with his daughters improved. They weren't just checking in out of obligation anymore. They were genuinely curious about his new life. The key lesson here? By building a vibrant social life, you free yourself from relying solely on your children for emotional fulfillment. Instead, you create new sources of joy, support, and companionship. And in the process, you show your children that you're living a rich, independent life, a life they'll want to be part of. Conclusion. Navigating the ups and downs of relationships with your children as you grow older can feel challenging, but it's absolutely possible to regain peace, dignity, and respect. By embracing these 8 powerful insights, whether it's pausing to reflect instead of reacting in anger, setting firm yet loving boundaries, or leading by example, you can create healthier, more meaningful connections with your children while staying true to your own needs and self-worth. Remember, the journey to stronger relationships starts with small, intentional steps. Every action you take to honor yourself and your values sets the stage for deeper understanding and respect from those around you. Thank you so much for watching. If these insights resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a 1 in the comments if you're ready to start implementing these steps in your own life, or a 0 if you're just beginning to reflect on these changes. Either way, you're on the right path, and I'm cheering you on. Take care of yourself, and never forget, your worth isn't tied to anyone else's behavior. It's timeless, and it's yours to cherish.